Coogs house. It's March, it's madness, and it's now up to Houston to be sure that Cinderella doesn't find her slipper. Can't we smash it or take a hammer to it or something?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who can step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. You should make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation, but you don't know what to say, I'm asking about barbecue side dishes. What's your favorite barbecue side dish right now? Tournaments in Kansas City. There's all barbecue and the barbecue battles between Kansas, Texas, right? So tell me in the comments down below what your favorite barbecue side dish is. Today's show is brought to you by TurboTax. We've got more on that later. Got a lot to get into. I do want to talk about the tournament as a whole some at the end of the show, a Final Seven kind of thing, just kind of see what's going on around the league, talk about the tournament as a whole. I do want to talk about this matchup between Houston and Colorado on Thursday afternoon. But first, and perhaps foremost, how did we get to be playing Colorado? I mean, Colorado is the 16th seed in the Big 12 tournament. That means they were in dead last in the conference, 90th in the net. That also means, for what it's worth, if you're keeping track at home, as of the time these two teams are going to be playing on Thursday, this is the only quad 2 win opportunity. Houston has the only quad 2 win opportunity of anyone in the field of the Big 12. Everyone else is a quad 1 opportunity, if that's the kind of thing that you're caring about these days. But how did Colorado get here? So Colorado, again, they won over the weekend against TCU. It didn't matter. They still got the 16th seed. And then they matched up again with TCU for the second time in 4 days and beat TCU in the first round of the Big 12 tournament. Now, having just beaten them over the weekend, you could tell me that wasn't so surprising. TCU beat them earlier in the season, but they went from playing in Boulder over the weekend to playing in Kansas City on whatever that was, Tuesday, and played well. TCU, kind of a team that never really put it together, does have some talent, but felt like they had some chemistry kind of issues. Not like chemistry like they were fighting a lot, but just didn't quite gel. The bigger surprise, though, is that Colorado knocked out West Virginia, who's kind of consensusly in the tournament at this point. They're on that 10-11 line. I guess 11 you get put in a play-in game potentially. But it seems like West Virginia is a tournament team, and Colorado knocked them off. Colorado's going to have to win this Big 12 conference tournament to get into the big dance. And they've really kind of had a pretty down year. They lost their first 13 Big 12 conference regular season games, but are 5-4 in their last 9, if you count the 2 in this tournament. You can argue they were actually 0-14 before that because they played Iowa State in Maui in what was technically a non-conference game. A big win for them in Maui. They beat UConn. At the time was crazy chaotic. Looking back, that might make a little bit more sense. I mean, UConn's also looking at that 8-9 matchup kind of spot. So UConn and West Virginia are similar kind of teams, I guess. Against West Virginia, Colorado was down 44-35 with about 10.5 minutes to go. I'd have argued that West Virginia had more talent on the floor, and it didn't really seem to matter. Big fella, 6'10", 275, Elijah Malone at Colorado put the work and hurt on West Virginia, kind of pinned and penetrated against his matchup as a big guy. And then as they altered their defense to try and cover that up, he was pretty good at spinning the ball around. Elijah Malone comes off the bench. He's not their starting big out there at Colorado, but he was a very impactful player in that one. Obviously, Hammond, their big-time guard, was big in this as well. As they got closer to the stretch, the final part of the game, they really kind of let Hammond take over the matchup. And taking over the matchup, I should point out that Julian Hammond III was kind of their everything guy. He checked back into the game with 4 minutes and 24 seconds left. After that mark, he had 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 made free throws, and honestly probably would have had more points had they been trying to score and not waste clock. He also was the closest defender on a couple of missed shots from West Virginia in that key stretch. And really Julian Hammond was impressive in this one. We talked about going into this, frankly, how TCU is probably the team I wanted Houston to see out of these three. So the winner between Colorado and TCU is going to play West Virginia for the right to play Houston. And West Virginia might have been kind of up in the air. It depends on which West Virginia you're going to see. Colorado feels hot right now. And I don't know if they're finding something they feel like that works or what you could argue the deal is for them in a big picture kind of sense. I do think, though, that when you look at their roster, like they've got talented kids. Tad Boyle he's been okay other places. I said to say that, like, maybe we shouldn't be as surprised here that the 16 seed in the Big 12 tournament is actually a good team. Again, it's a shame that they're the 90th team in the net, because right now that would be a quad 2 game for Houston, which means that they're playing a team in the top 100 on a neutral floor. There's all kinds of like statistics as how that balances out, but it'd be unlikely that even if they won the Big 12 tournament, that Colorado would leap from 90 up to inside the top 50 to be a quad 1 game on a neutral floor that had to be inside the top 50. So this is probably going to stay at a quad 2. It might drop. It's probably more likely to drop to a quad 3 game for Houston, in that Colorado, I guess, could fall out of the top 100 and then be on a neutral floor and so on. Colorado has played 2 games in back-to-back days coming into Houston. Houston's their 3rd game in 3 days, and each of those games before Houston is hyper-competitive. I would add on to that, we talk about wear and tear and stress on their bodies and legs, that Colorado also played just over the weekend on Saturday. So since Saturday, the Houston game will be their 4th game, the previous 3 all being pretty close and competitive games they had to have to win. You think Houston, playing Baylor on Saturday ought to feel pretty fresh by Thursday. I know that Sampson gave them some time off there early on to kind of get time off the floor. I guess they still got, they want to go get shots up they could or whatever, but they didn't have practice on 1 or 2 of those days. In between there, they did film and individual stuff or whatever, but no team-oriented, sprints and conditioning and wear and tear in their bodies, that kind of stuff. And so I look at this and I think, like, well, what has Colorado found that could scare me? And honestly, it's probably the thing that's the scariest thing that Houston's seen all year is when a game got close against West Virginia, Colorado fell into and they had the lead for parts of this too. They didn't have to get the ball back or anything, but Colorado fell into a 2-2-1 press. When things got close against TCU, Colorado fell into a 2-2-1 press. And when things got close against TCU over the weekend before this, they also fell into a 2-2-1 press. It feels like when games are on the line and being decided, that Colorado is going to fall into that sort of a press. I want to talk about this matchup. I want to talk about like all of the press breaky kind of things I think Houston's going to do in the second segment. I even got my handy dandy, teacher and coach, got my board here to talk through some of that stuff. But I really think that what worries me about that is that's the kind of thing we've seen Houston kind of like have brain lapses against other teams beforehand. I'm not saying Houston should have any trouble, or that in that final 5 minutes when Colorado's been pressing, that Houston should have, it should be a close game. If Houston goes out and plays their A game versus A game here, Houston wins by a lot. The issue is if they're hot playing their A game and you're not, it's just a 1-game sample. What happens there? Now, I said that I want to talk about the matchup, and I said in the last segment I want to talk about the Big 12 tournament as a whole. I will say that even the most ardent, why are we doing this conference tournament thing, or whatever kind of person, which I could very well be, I guess, would tell you that they don't want to play bad in the conference tournament, no matter who's on the floor. You want to feel a little, you don't want your last taste in your mouth before going into the late tournament to be feeling bad about how you play. So I want to talk about that matchup and how Houston can avoid that as a whole in a second. But first, I remind you that today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you ever checked your bank account and just wondered, like, where'd all my money go? Where did it all go between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, tickets to the basketball tournament, whatever, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's more than that. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, spending all in one place. Stop just managing your money, start building your wealth. The all-in convenience of like not having to juggle a bunch of different apps and banks and this and that. It's really easy to use Monarch to keep track of everything in one spot. You can take control of your finances. Use code Locked On College at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It's monarchmoney.com, code Locked On College for 50% off your first full year. Today's show is also brought to you by Factor. If you're looking to optimize your nutrition right now and this year, Factor, it makes eating, easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 different dietary preferences each week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, keto, anything you've got going on, they've got it going on too. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. Now, I said I'm a teacher, I'm a coach, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I do this podcasting gig. I got a lot going on. The biggest thing about Factor to me is that it takes the stress out of meal planning. The convenience, undeniable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege 50 off. That's code LockedOnCollege 50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnCollege 50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege 50 off to get 50% off for free shipping on your first box. Parker Ranger Locked on Coogs here, talking about Houston and Colorado in this matchup. In the, quarterfinal, technically, it feels like the opening round for Houston, but the quarterfinal for Houston in the Big 12 tournament. These two teams did play earlier this year. They played in Boulder in early February, about a month ago. I think it was like Saturday in February, so it was about a little over a month ago. Houston won by 10 without Emanuel Sharp. Kind of also without JVR. JVR had not played the game before this with the concussion deal. Played just 4 minutes this one with foul trouble, and I'd argue he still was I don't want to say they played him concussion like that. I'm not trying to say that, but he just didn't look like his best self. He's going to play a lot better at different points this year. But without Emanuel and barely with JVR, you saw a pretty dominant effort at different points in this game from Houston on the road. Juwan Roberts led the game with 20 points. LJ Carter Arsenault, who started in place of Emanuel Sharp, added their own 15 apiece. I thought most impressive, though, that I think people are kind of missing out on it. It might be something that's hard to look back on because he was 2 of 5 from the foul line, but Milos Uzan was pretty clean and crisp in this game. 12 points, hit both of his 3-point attempts, 6 assists, just 1 turnover. Really, really impressed his growth this year. Is one of those good games from that middle chunk of the season. Houston dominated this game inside, and that's, I think, the interesting thing coming off of watching Colorado beat up in West Virginia inside is Houston beat them up inside. And that was their big advantage in the first matchup, right? Houston won the rebounding battle 38-26, and it felt like more than that even. It probably felt like more than that because Houston actually did more than double the amount of points in the paint that Colorado had. Really, really kind of put their will and stamp on the game in that one. Houston jumped out to like a 9-0 lead and then kind of spent the game like the bully at the playground, where you keep your arm at a distance. They can't quite swing and get you in that one. 6 to 10 points throughout most of the game. At one point, it did get cut to 2 with like the 6-minute mark or so, and then you had a great Arsenault left-handed drive and finish through contact that they did not call. And about 20 seconds later, he had a great Malik Wilson steal for a dunk. Felt like he poked it out and had a free shot at the end zone, kind of was it scoop and score kind of moment. I usually say pick 6 with Malik, but that felt more like a scoop and score. And offensive success in this one for Houston came out of a lot of they went side-to-side action and sets to get kind of the defense spread out, and then they'd get a high pick and roll. And what they were finding is, Cryer got his floaters, or Arsenault got his stuff in the mid-range, and Arsenault had a couple of isolations in the wing too that actually worked pretty well for him. But they very quickly realized that it was a Juwan Roberts kind of day, started hitting him on the short roll, and they actually, we would call it peeling the ball. So the guy comes flat off the ball screen instead of trying to attack, pulls defenders with him, and then Roberts, or at some points Tugler, I guess a lot, even did it once, but like sprinted to a post up on the near side block, and you got the ball entered that way. You hoped with a mismatch on the screen, but after the movement, the defense is a little unsettled for him to then isolate from the block. Really, really good game from an X and O standpoint in terms of that. Again, it's always NBA-centric style offense with Kelvin, but it was a very fluid game plan that they kind of took advantage of what Colorado was giving them. Eventually, though, I had to also point out they kept the game to 10 points. Again, they cut it to 2 with a little over 5 minutes to go. And that's because Julian Hammond had 22 points at 5 threes. I thought he was really impressive. They used him a lot in hunting different mismatches. And so as much as the big guys beat up West Virginia, Hammond seemed like the guy that was their go-to guy against Houston, at least they thought so in their scouting report. Again, 22 points. He led all scorers in both teams, 5 threes, and those hunting of mismatches were they'd run different side picks and side whatever to kind of get him with the ball moving laterally to pull the new defender with him, and then he would attack that. Houston's got a lot of really good defenders, so I don't know, outside of size, we tried to go at Cryer a couple times because Julian Hammond's 6'5". I don't know that he felt a whole lot of other mismatches were successful, but it certainly would look like the action they're trying to go with. And then I mentioned that they run a press. And from a mismatch perspective, I think at this point in the season, back in February, we would have called that a mismatch for Houston. Houston's having trouble with it. And against Baylor, Houston did some things to figure it out. So I'm going to try and talk this through for the audio audience as well. But I've drawn it up here, the press break on my board. You'll see that down at the bottom, we got number 7 throwing it in, Milos Uzan and Colorado, with numbers of the starters. Then what they were doing was like a stack lineup on the other side of the floor against Baylor when they ran a very successful press break just last weekend. They went center, JoJo Tugler, power forward, Juwan Roberts, and the other 2 guards, Emanuel Sharp and LJ Cryer, stacked behind them. And that gets important in a second with how they break the press. They line up opposite the ball every single time to break that. And what they ended up doing in this one was they would swing Emanuel around, and he would kind of use the big guys as a shield to get him into the lane. From there, he would vertically pop because Baylor ran a man press, but what you could also see happen is him end up in the corner near the ball if he had to. LJ Cryer would then go the other direction off of the big guys and into the far side corner. So you now have theoretically both corners covered if you needed to. And then Juwan Roberts flashed middle. JoJo Tugler ran deep. And so theoretically you had JoJo Tugler, if you think about your home run deep threat in a football game. Emanuel Sharp has a whole half of the floor he can operate from. If it's man or in zone, he can find the soft spot. Once he gets that half the floor, that's where they're trying to go a lot of times against Baylor. He took off down the sideline a couple times in that one. You also then have a release valve and Juwan Roberts in the middle, and then LJ Cryer at the opposite corner. So what you see against a 2-2-1 zone is you're going to see ball pressure in these 2 big circles I'm drawing right there, right? And so what you're going to have there is ball pressure there with Emanuel getting to play one in between Emanuel in one corner, LJ Cryer in the other, and Juwan Roberts in the middle. They're probably going to give something up at least long enough for Houston to get the ball in bounds. And what's interesting about what Houston does to break a press, always with Kelvin, but certainly this season. I've heard Kelvin talk about this before at a coaching clinic. Kelvin really, really believes in having your best passer throw the ball in, no matter what position they play. And for most teams, that is their point guard. It's a little counterintuitive, but that's putting the ball in what you believe to be your best decision maker's hands in that instance. So Milos will be throwing the ball in 90% of the time against the press. And what he's doing, if it gets to Juwan Roberts, to the nail in that middle area like we talked about or whatever, is he's stepping in to get the ball. And if the defense reacts to the ball, you can quickly get it right back to Milos and he takes off down the floor, right? And previously they had different kind of ways to cut and get open against presses and work. So this more organized break, I think, it may feel a little bit more amateur than a lot of the NBA kind of stuff they run on offense at Houston. I think it is effective, and it was really, I think, pretty for the first time we saw it being run against Baylor. I thought they ran it really well, almost like they kind of been practicing it all season but haven't been running it, which made me wonder why they haven't been running it. Now, all that's to say that I see this matchup as a chance for Houston. Houston is fresh. Houston is much healthier than they were when they played this team, a little over a month ago. Houston's had a few days off. Houston had a shoot around on Wednesday. I feel like this ought to be the kind of game for Houston where they kind of get things right. There's no knock against Colorado. I mentioned they lost 13 straight Big 12 games before getting here, and now they're finding themselves in the Big 12 quarterfinal. They've also, even in this 9-game stretch, are just a game over 500. I would argue that part of why Houston struggled in Colorado was because it was a road game. While they did go undefeated on the road this season, we know they won some of those very, very closely too, right? And so I'm thinking Houston ought to be okay here. I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch. But I do think that this is the kind of thing where we'll see Houston get right and head to a fun game on Friday. And I want to talk about what's going on in the rest of the Big 12 tournament as well, and kind of how the landscape is looking in this tournament as a whole. But before we get too far, today's show is brought to you, like we said at the top, by TurboTax. And this message is from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. And now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on the rest of your day. An expert who will find you every single deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can find the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only at iOS mobile apps. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Parker Andrew, Locked On Coogs here, talking about Houston, Colorado, the Big 12 tournament. And the Big 12 tournament has proven to be interesting thus far. Obviously, Colorado is the 16 seed, knocking off TCU and West Virginia. West Virginia is a tournament team. It's impressive, to say the least. I do think Colorado probably has to win on out, beat Houston, and go on way and win the conference championship game to get into the tournament. I don't think that's a secret or anything like that. Interestingly enough, though, I think the other 7 teams in the quarterfinals will all play in the NCAA tournament. I think that the Big 12's got at least 7 teams. I think you probably also see West Virginia in there to make it 8. I'm not a betting man, but I would look at that as, like, if I'm being frank, I think that's just the way this is going to go. You got Colorado and Houston is the 2 o'clock game. Looking the rest of the day for in Kansas City, trying to find basketball or whatever. The early morning game, I say early morning because it's early morning. Houston is 11:30 a.m. is BYU and Iowa State. Baylor and Texas Tech is the 6 o'clock game. The marquee ESPN matchup that night is Kansas and Arizona. Like I said, I think if you swapped Colorado for West Virginia, all 8 of those teams would be in NCAA tournament. As far as the rest of that goes, though, outside of Colorado, this is very chalk kind of bracket thus far. Iowa State handled business. Baylor handled business. Kansas scared you for a second there because they're Kansas and they'll do that. But Kansas ultimately handled business against UCF. So let's start with that game as far as looking around the conference. Game went to overtime. Honestly, I kind of thought UCF was going to win in overtime at one point in it. Kansas held on. Kansas got away with a couple of nice friendly whistle kind of plays in that one as well. Now, I will say that big part of their game for that one was AJ. I mean, key players had key moments. Dickinson had his points. Zeke Mayo had his points. KJ Adams had his points, whatever, right? But AJ Storr had 19 off the bench for Kansas in a really high-scoring matchup with Johnny Dawkins' UCF squad. Houston saw the UCF squad up close and in person in Orlando. They were good. And it's a shame that they were on the downside of some of these close games throughout their schedule, because ultimately that's a team that I think really could have upset someone in the first week in the NCAA tournament just because they played in so many close games this year. But they're heading home. Blue Bloods are going to blue blood, and Kansas moving on to the quarterfinal. The other games played on Wednesday. You had Baylor. I don't want to say like routed or anything like that, Kansas State, but Baylor certainly took care of business against Kansas State. Both VJ Edgecombe and Norchad Almere had double-doubles in that one. Jaden Nunn had 18 points off the bench. No trouble scoring for Baylor in that game. The story of that one to me, though, is unfortunately after the game, very emotional. Coleman Hawkins, big-time transfer from Illinois to Kansas State, I think was on the wrong end of a lot of internet vitriol when people were really kind of using him as a face of things that they don't like about the NIL era in college basketball. And he, got some fairly vitriolic hate messages and memos and tweets and all that kind of stuff. And very emotional guy after saying wish he'd handled things differently, and no one knows what kind of stuff that he was going through and this and that. And just felt like a moment, I tweeted this out when I saw it. It felt like a moment where you kind of you got to remember that these, even if they're 22, 20, these are college kids, right? And I think people forget that when see big dollar signs next to the names or whatever. But I think people forget the humanity of that a lot of times. And it was kind of, you almost wish that Kansas State beat Baylor to, just to maybe make their season feel like less of a, like they didn't miss the mark by quite as much. Obviously, they had high expectations for a fairly high NIL budget team and proved that it takes a little bit more than that. But Baylor moves on. That's going on around the conference right now. I guess the other game was Iowa State, Cincinnati. When you talk about chalk, that one was a fairly routine 20-point Iowa State win. For what it's worth, it did look like the Hilton South folks were already in attendance, looked fairly red and gold across the stadium there. I could pick out a number of different scores from that game. Really, really impressive Iowa State squad that I would love for BYU to beat in the next round, so Houston doesn't have to play them again because that Iowa State team is good. I guess the two guys that missed against Houston, Curtis Jones had 8 points. And I think I was more impressed probably by their big guy in that one, Deshaun Jackson. He was like the 7 foot, 280-pound dude or whatever, right? He's a big guy. In this game, he had 10 points and 15 rebounds, kind of dominated Cincinnati inside. I didn't think Cincinnati was all that bad when I watched them before the Houston game, but they've had a rough season, 18 and 15. They were in the top 25 at one point and fell dramatically out of that one. And so, again, outside of Colorado, the rest of the Big 12 is chalk thus far. Houston's hoping to make it chalk the rest of the way as the number one seed in the conference. I think, though, that obviously you want to beat Colorado because you don't want to have the bad taste in your mouth. But it does open the question, what all does Houston really need to do or prove in this tournament? I think, honestly, the answer is probably, in all reality, nothing. Houston has proven they should be a 1 seed by doing the much more difficult thing and going 19-1 in the regular season in this conference. I think it's a much more challenging task for sure, and they've done that across the board. They hadn't been trailing at the end of regulation since November 9th, the first Saturday of the season. I think Houston's really in good shape come seeding day, Selection Sunday and all of that. That said, I know that this Kelvin Sampson program is going to roll out a starting lineup and play starter minutes and do everything they can to compete and win every game. As I said, throughout this process, as much as we want to see rest and health and all that kind of stuff, Kelvin Sampson accurately points out you cannot build a culture where everyone competes to win everything they do and then take games off. That doesn't work together. And I think that's real. I heard him say that years ago, back when, frankly, Houston couldn't stand to take games off. And now that they can stand it, they still don't. And I think that culture resonates throughout that window is probably why they're so good. And anyway, so I guarantee you're going to see starter minutes out of starters throughout the rest of these Big 12 tournament games, however many there are. Now, here's the deal. This game tips off at 2 o'clock local Central Texas time, Central Time Zone, Texas time. There you go. I will get as much of it in live as I can. Again, teacher, coach, a lot of stuff going on throughout the day. I'm going to hand out some individual work, being honest, see how some of that goes while I'm paying attention to what's going on. And we'll be live for maybe 10 minutes right when it's over. From there, we're going to obviously have a full digestible 30-minute episode for you Friday morning. We're going to talk about whatever happens and whatever happens next in that. But we'll get solid 8 to 10 minute reaction live immediately after. It just cannot be very long because daycare is going to make sure I come pick up my little guy at some point tomorrow afternoon as well. It's just the way things go and when the timing of it all works out. Luckily, Friday night's games are Friday night. If Houston does what we think they should do and gets there, breaking those things down live as well. Locked On Cougs, place to get your daily Houston Cougar content, again, each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. Remember, the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Cougs. Oh, Big 12 squad this afternoon, too. Big 12 squad. Fun time.